So as I mentioned, my name's Kyle Dzintars. I'm a counselor at the SUNY Oswego Counseling Center. I'll go through some of the counseling information at the end, so you can stick around to learn a little bit more about what services we have available. But today's program, I wanted to focus a lot on self-compassion. It's something I've been learning a lot more about and trying to practice a lot more for myself recently. Um, but I'll tell you, the title of this program came from a conversation with somebody when they expressed confusion about the fact that they could be nice to themselves. And I think that that's something that really resonates with other people as well. Like I've heard it so many times, like being harsh or critical of myself, it motivates me, it gets me going. I would do nothing if I wasn't like stern and strict with myself. And it's been interesting to learn about self-compassion and all the research that's been done because so much of it disproves that idea that we have to be mean or harsh or critical of ourselves in order to do well at things or to meet our goals. So part of this is recorrecting some of that ideology that's kind of developed in our culture, and then also some very simple practices to help you find ways to be more compassionate to yourselves. So just as an overall disclaimer, this isn't intended to be a replacement for any kind of clinical services. I would say if you're interested in pursuing that, feel free to contact the counseling center to get set up with a counselor. But just know this is really educational. It's here to give you the information to maybe start some practice for yourself in that way. If you experience anything that's a crisis or overwhelming, it gets to that point, I would say reach out to supports that you might have or can connect with. If need be, you can just walk away from the computer for a little bit, or if it's urgent crisis, obviously call 911 or go to the emergency room. For privacy and confidentiality sake, we can't guarantee it just because Zoom is somewhat of a public space. Nothing that will be recorded here today will appear in the recording. So please, other participants, if anybody does share anything along the way in the chat or verbally, please just keep that between us. That would be helpful just so we can respect each other's stories. And then please don't record this. I will be recording it and I'll be posted on our website later this week. So you'll have access to it. If you want to use any of the information or if you have more questions, just reach out to me. I'm happy to share anything. And then you can always contact our office to get set up with either counseling services, ask more questions, and I put our phone number listed there as well. All right. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about self-criticism. So where does it come from? And then how does it physically affect us? Because it does have some lasting effects. Self-compassion, so defining what that means to be compassionate to ourselves, and then also what effects does it have on our physical being and our mental health? And then we'll dive into the elements of self-compassion. So there are three components we'll explore today that I think make up and encompass what self-compassion is. We'll give you some of the information to work with, and then we'll end with having some practices and some ideas that you can take with you. So hopefully this stuff sticks and you can bring it with you throughout your day, throughout your week, and continuing on in the future. All right, let's start with self-criticism. So self-criticism is a very powerful thing. We experience it in so many different ways as humans, and it serves a purpose. It's just sometimes it becomes so overwhelming and debilitating that it actually gets in the way of us achieving and accomplishing what we want for ourselves. It can make it really hard to just feel comfortable in our own skin and being who we are because we're constantly feeling like we need to be better or different or change something. So our human brain is hardwired to be attentive to threats. And this starts in early human life with, there's real threats to our safety and security. Hopefully no one has to worry about like tiger attacks at this point anymore. I'm sure some people do, but in knowing that our threats in this culture and here have changed somewhat to be more of emotional threats, of being isolated or being somewhat misunderstood or misperceived, some of that emotional threat that it's warped into has become very harmful physically for us. So when we are perceiving these threats, and this could be critique, could be criticism, it could be the fear of what people think about you. The easiest example is especially with friends. If you have like a friend group that you're in, but sometimes it's hard to tell if someone's like, they like being around you, they want you there, or they don't. That kind of ambiguous feeling. a lot of the time our physical being, our body is interpreting that as an emotional threat. So when that happens, it activates our safety and security network. So our amygdala gets activated, which is often detecting danger. So it's trying to say, are we safe with this person? Are we not safe with this person? And then it releases cortisol and adrenaline, which is our stress response. So that helps us to kick into gear for whatever threat we have to deal with. So sometimes that leads us to feel like, the fight, flight, and freeze mode. It kicks in for different people at different times, and they experience it very differently. But just know that level of stress and attention and awareness that we have to have when we are worried about this threat, that can lead, if we experience it chronically, to increases in anxiety and depression. So, I mean, you probably know this. It feels like that probably makes a lot of sense, right? You are alert and attentive and unsure of your surroundings all the time. Of course, you're going to feel like more anxious, depressed. You're just not going to know what's going on. And that uncertainty really affects us. So, if we can understand this cycle and how it happens emotionally right now, we can start to break that and maybe have a little bit of new practices or new ways of kind of slowing things down to make sense of what we're experiencing. So the danger here is that we don't want to be both the attacker and the victim, because when we're self-criticizing, when we're beating ourselves up or berating ourselves, we're doing just that. We are attacking us, and we're also feeling the effects of being attacked. So it's a tough cycle. And that's where I want to explore what self-compassion can lead us into. So where does this voice come from, right? The self-critical voice. I think it comes from a lot of different places. And some of this makes sense, right? You're all in education. That's why you're here. Our education system is designed for that, right? Throughout our schooling, we are constantly getting feedback about what we need to do differently, what we can improve, what we're not doing so well. So you have that starting point too of someone basically saying, like, this is what you need to do to get better. We have family influences, right? So a lot of our family friend influences in our lives, they're helping us to either find appropriate, satisfactory ways of being in the world. So how do we be a good friend to someone? How do we take care of other people? What are the nice things that we should and shouldn't be doing? So all of this stuff kind of compacts. And then when you add in cultural messages, cultural influences, right? Like mass media, so magazines, TV, movies, all of the messages that get communicated through those mediums of how we should and shouldn't be in the world. When you capture all of that, that is a lot of stuff to sort through. And you can see where it would be very hard to know like the right way to be in the world. So trying to make sense of all of these messages sometimes leads us to then becoming our own critic. We don't even need people to tell us that we're not doing something because we're already doubting and worrying about it so much that we become like our own prison guard, right? Like, oh, don't do this because they're not going to like it. Don't wear that because that's not going to look good or someone's going to judge you. So we become that internal voice ends up being very powerful. So why does it have so much power? Because we've been taught that it does have a lot of power. There's a lot of power in being excluded, right? When you are able to exclude someone, that is a lot of power to work with. When you are the person being excluded, that's hard. It hurts. It feels terrible. We don't like being disconnected from the people around us. So we know it has a lot of power. And then what does it want? It wants some sense of security and safety, but it can't really do that when it has these mixed messages, often contradictory messages, right? There are times where, we're told we should be one way and another way, and we can't be both because it's not possible to be both. So that leaves us feeling like, all right, well, how am I supposed to be? And then what do I do about it? You'll learn a lot more about that throughout this. So one thing I think is helpful is this idea of externalizing that voice, because it isn't you. It is all of the things that have been told to you over the years It has been all the things that's been taught to you about how you should and shouldn't be. So one way I think it's really important to separate it from your identity, because I think you're more at the core of this. You as a person are you're the person being influenced by all of these things. So if we externalize this, we put it somewhere else, I think it gives us a better idea of how to understand and work with this thing. So I recommend, and it might seem a little silly and playful, but draw a picture of what that self-critic looks like. I've put a little image of a monster here, but it could be a person figure, it could be a shape, it could be a collection of words and phrases. Create it as its own character. I think that movie, there's a Pixar movie, Inside Out, that uses a lot of our internal emotions as characters, trying to influence like how we feel and think. I do think that that applies really well with this self-critic idea as well. So make it its own character. What's its personality like? What does it say to you? How does it treat you? And then as that starts to take shape, I think you'll see you have a little bit more say in things. You won't feel like you're just fighting against yourself when you're being hard on yourself. You're fighting against this collection of influences in our lives that often tell us that we're not doing enough or we're not good enough. So I think that'll help give us a direction here. So if you draw it, that would be great. If you want to share it at some point, you can. But give it a shot. All right. So let's dive into self-compassion, because this is the opposite of what we're talking about when we're talking about self-criticism. So self-criticism, we know, is powerful. I just went through the physiological response that we have, how we deal with that stuff. Self-compassion is also incredibly powerful, and I've included some reasons here. So self-compassion is linked to our care system. It's the part of us that helps us to feel connected and safe and secure. We need both of these systems, right? We have our threat system, which helps us to avoid danger, and we have our care system, which helps us to come down from threat, right? When we feel grounded and safe, when we are connected with other people, we don't have to live with this chronic stress of threat and having to be attentive. So self-compassion actually kicks that system in. That helps us to come down from the threat system. So this system releases oxytocin and endorphins, and that helps us reduce the stress levels that we're experiencing. It gives us a sense of safety and security. And we get these things through very basic practices. You can probably think of times where, you were really like upset about something, and the fact that someone you cared about gave you a hug, it was like a gentle way of just connecting and touching somebody, embracing somebody else. It actually releases a lot of those internal endorphins and oxytocin that helps us to feel grounded. So when that stuff happens, we're actually recovering from stress. That can be as simple as hand holding. I put like back rubs if someone's like rubbing your back or your shoulders. And then if, touch isn't really your thing, I know some people are not interested in that. They don't want to have any kind of connection physically with other people. Gentle vocalizations can do the same thing. So you think of, infants and parental figures, right? Like whispering and singing and communicating in these very gentle, soft, compassionate ways. That helps babies to be soothed, right? They might be upset and crying. That's one way that we help them to feel relaxed and secure. So the same applies for you as an adult. Those really gentle communications can be really, really helpful. It activates this system. So that can be kind words and support. And you could see where this is going, right? Like if other people are able to do that for you, you are also able to do that for you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So self-compassion is this system. When we are able to say nice and kind things to ourselves, when we're able to stop being our own bully and our own prison guard, we are able to just be nice and understanding and compassionate to ourselves. And that will help to self-regulate our bodies, our mind, and it's really, really good for our mental health and well-being. So I know this isn't easy. I feel like a lot of people struggle with this idea of being nice to themselves. And some of the feedback that I got in the initial poll was like, yeah, sometimes it's easier to be nice to other people. It's really hard to be nice and kind and understanding to myself when I'm struggling. So we'll talk more about some of these practices as we keep going. I just wanted to really emphasize this idea of a care system, because that is something that we have say in, even if we're not relying or dependent on other people. We can be that for ourselves. So I really liked this model. I took a lot of this information from Selfcompassion workbook by Dr. Kristen Neff and Dr. Chris Germer. I'll put the resources at the end so you can see that. But they'd set up this idea of we have a stress response, right? We have something that happens and our body kicks into stress response. We could be fighting to get our way out of something or keep ourselves safe. We could be running, get out of the situation. We could be freezing, where we're just like, I emotionally don't know what to do. I can't do anything. When those responses start to be harmful and turn into this self-criticism, this isolation and this rumination, that's where we start to see anxiety and depression, right? We're being hard on ourselves. We're not reaching out to the people who would be supportive or help us connect to being understood and someone else offering empathy. And then we're stuck ruminating. We're going through those thought patterns of like, why am I doing this? Why can't I just do this thing? Why am I struggling so much? What's wrong with me? All of these like simple, subtle self-critiques that sneak in. So the flip side of that through self-compassion is building self-kindness, is building common humanity, and is building mindfulness. We're going to go through those three specifically, but I really like seeing this model kind of laid out of we get to pick a path. Sometimes it's not something that happens by intention or isn't deliberate, right? We might get triggered by something that's going on in our lives. That could be a fight with a friend. That could be a test that's coming up. That could be dealing with like financial struggles. All of these things kind of kick in and our body naturally responds in a specific way to those situations. But we do have a choice in whether or not we make decisions about, do we continue on down this path of stress response? Do we continue on towards something that's more grounding, that helps us to regulate and be able to handle some of the challenges we face? So let's talk a little bit about mindfulness first. So mindfulness is everywhere right now. I'm sure you've heard the word by now. I like to think of it as just being able to recognize what we feel and where we're feeling it, to be accepting fully of what we are going through. And that isn't always easy, right? A great example of this is maybe as a kid, you were raised that you got upset and angry at something, and then someone says you shouldn't even be angry about that because blah, 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 blah. So then you internalize this message of, I shouldn't be angry. If you stick with that long enough, then it's not okay to feel anger. And then it's not okay to feel what you're feeling. We learn subtly to distrust ourselves. So when we are unable to accept that we are angry, of course, that leaves us in a state of inner conflict, right? We feel angry, but we shouldn't be angry. So what are we supposed to do? And that doesn't feel very good. Mindfulness is the starting point of saying, I feel angry. No judgment, no should or should not. It's just how I feel. And you don't have to do anything beyond that. So mindfulness is really slowing things down to say, before I censor myself, before I judge myself, before someone else can judge what I'm feeling, let me just recognize and validate what it is. So this is very simple. You feel something, you call it something, and that's it. And I think sometimes we just get so used to being told we shouldn't feel a certain way that we have all these extra steps. So I highly recommend your initial practice being, I feel this, label it. Where do I feel it? Because how do you know what you're feeling and where you feel it? If I'm upset, right? Maybe I feel that in my head. I get a headache. I start crying. Maybe my stomach gets upset. That doesn't feel good. If I'm angry, maybe I'm clenching my jaw, clenching my fists. My legs are tight. Notice any of those physical sensations that you get when you start to feel something. And just notice it. There's no right or wrong. It is just your experience of that emotion. And I will emphasize here, sometimes this process becomes difficult because we've been taught and trained to not sit with our feelings. So maybe you're listening here and you're like, well, if I feel upset, I don't want to sit with that. That doesn't feel good. You're used to, I don't know, picking up your phone, watching a TV show, I don't know, something that gets you out of facing what you're feeling. I would say if that's what you're used to, let yourself feel, label it, acknowledge it, and just breathe through it. You don't have to do it for long, but just breathe through that feeling. Help yourself know that you can be with it. And this might be short at first. This might be, well, I did it for 30 seconds and that's enough. I'm going to go do something else. I think the longer we feel okay with feeling what we're feeling, the better we'll do with choosing something beneficial for ourselves. So slow the process down. And then finally, this last part here is really important, the over-identification with emotions, right? This one, I think I gave a good example here, but there's a lot of different examples that might help connect with what you experience. So instead of, I am disappointed, I feel disappointed. Sometimes we start to think, well, I'm a disappointment because I feel this way. And that's something that we want to avoid doing because we aren't just that feeling. We are a world of experiences and emotions and thoughts and actions. So we are never just one thing. We can feel overwhelmed by one thing in the moment, right? Like maybe anger is the thing that's taking over and I am angry right now. But that doesn't mean I'm an angry person or I'm anger. We have to, in some ways, separate from those emotions. They are temporary and they will pass, and we can be with them through them. Next up, common humanity. So this part is really important, especially now, because we are more disconnected from other people. We're more isolated. Sometimes it's hard to know that we're not experiencing something entirely by ourselves. So when we're thinking of humans, we have to understand that like we're all flawed. We will all make mistakes. We will all struggle. We will all suffer. There are varying degrees of suffering and experiences, but we all will experience that at some point in our lives. So just in that, like you aren't alone with what you're going through. Like maybe someone else hasn't gone through exactly what you've gone through, but we all know that feeling of suffering and pain and hurt. And I think that's something that we need to remember right now, because I've heard and experienced that when we see people on social media, when we see and hear about people doing things in the world, sometimes it's hard to say like, well, why can they do all that stuff? Why are they feeling so great? And here I am just not feeling good at all. Like, why am I the one who's struggling when everybody else is doing well? And unfortunately, I do think that's the flaw of social media. We only want to share the good, so we only see the good. So I think behind those profiles and those accounts and pictures and descriptions, I think we're all going through it. Maybe we just don't talk about it as much. So I want to really normalize that we all have those experiences, and we need to remember that because that helps us to connect with all humanity. We don't have to feel entirely by ourselves. So you're not alone in your suffering. You aren't the only one, and you aren't the exception. I think we all have those experiences. Sometimes it's just hard to talk about. I really like the African philosophy Ubuntu, which translates to this idea of I am because we are. I am what I am because we are what we are. My humanity is wrapped up in all humanity. And I love the sense of community that this creates, because in order for us to feel grounded and secure and safe, we all need to embrace the fact that we are all human and connected in that humanity. So the more we can do this, the more we share our vulnerability, the more we share our stories and our experiences, the more upfront we are about what we are authentically, truthfully living, I think the more connected we'll actually be. And sometimes that takes saying, I'm not doing well right now, and being okay with other people hearing that. Because sometimes we feel like a burden, or like other people won't understand. And I want to argue that they probably will, even if they don't have the perfect tools to help you through it, or they can't make your life different. Just knowing that other people can feel that way is a starting point. And then lastly, we have self-kindness. So self-kindness is the trickiest part of this, because we're used to having maybe the not the nicest things that we say about ourselves. I have a hunch that you've probably experienced this if you're here. That self-talk becomes tough. How we talk to ourselves affects how we feel. So to go back to that idea of you are your own prison guard, when you become the person who's critiquing you, that's not going to help you feel like you can do more, or you can continue to grow, or take risks, or feel like you're doing enough. That's the part of you that's saying, well, you got to do better. This is not great. So when harsh self-talk arises, I think sometimes we worry about how we'll be perceived in the world, whether that's other people's perspectives, whether that's the people we care about, whether that's strangers. That kind of self-talk starts when we worry about what the perception of us is. So can we reframe this a little bit? Because most of the time when we think that way, we aren't working with reality and what people actually think about us. We're working with what we think they think. So we're just kind of filling in the gaps with this imaginary negative self-talk. So instead of saying something like, and maybe you can relate to this, why did I say that? That was so stupid. Now they're just going to hate me. Try to reframe that into something kind, grounding, honest, right? Because there's no guarantee that what you just said was going to make someone hate you. Maybe it didn't come out the way you wanted it or intended it to. Maybe it was upsetting to the other person, but it doesn't mean it's like the end of all things. So try to reframe that by saying something like, all right, it probably wasn't a big deal overall. Sometimes I say things that don't come out perfectly, but I'm not defined by this one thing. And you know this, right? Like you probably have family and friends where you've said something that didn't come out right, or you've said something that hurt or offended somebody else, and it wasn't the end of the relationship, right? That stuff, we can all come back from that stuff when we've built good relationships, when we trust other people, when we share what we're going through, when we ask for forgiveness. All of that stuff is so important. So in order to do that, we have to start by being kind to ourselves, to know that we're good enough and worthy enough to be nice, even when we mess up, because we do mess up. And that doesn't mean that you don't deserve that kind of kindness as well. So those are the 3 elements of self-compassion. Before I move into practices, any questions or anything that's come up so far? You can put those in the chat. Okay. So feel free, I will answer them as they come in. So we're going to do a little bit of a practice here because I want you to actually get the experience. I could talk all day. You could listen to a bunch of theory, but until you actually feel it and experience it, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. So what I'd like you to do is just get comfortable in your chair or your bed or the floor, wherever you are. Just get cozy. Put yourself in a nice, relaxed situation. If you're feeling tense, try your best to get like comfortable. Like maybe that's easing up your shoulders or your back. Maybe that's putting your feet on the floor. And you can do this one of two ways. You can close your eyes, perfectly fine, or you can keep your eyes open and I walk you through it. I would say probably find a fixed position in the room to look at, something that you can focus on as you do this practice. Okay, we're going to start with a nice deep breath in. And out. One more deep breath in. And out. Just start to feel your body relax and get settled. You can keep breathing as you need to. Deep breaths in and out. And what I want you to do is pick a situation in your life. This could be a recent situation. It could have been something that happened in the past. And I want it to be something that isn't so overwhelming, right? It's not the thing that's going to bring you to tears or break you down right now. Just something that didn't sit right with you or that you felt bad about or that you found yourself not being so nice to yourself about. I would say mild to moderate is a good one to start with. This could be a conflict with a person. This could be not meeting an expectation you set for yourself. This could be maybe just disappointing yourself. Choose a situation. And when you have it, I want you to imagine the situation unfolding. So it could have happened in the past. I want you to kind of like walk through the situation, or it could be something that you're anticipating or going through now. And I want you to imagine maybe like what your fear of happening is. What's the thing that's stressful or upsetting about that situation? And as you do that, just notice what you start to feel. Does your chest get tight? Does your jaw clench? Do you start to get like jittery in your legs or your hands? Does it make your stomach upset? So label whatever it is that you feel and notice where you start feeling it. It might be really subtle. It might be really big. But just notice it. And notice if you start to feel overwhelmed by this to the point of minimizing or judging yourself already. It's okay if it's happening, but just notice it. Do you start finding yourself talking yourself out of feeling what you feel? Or saying like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. You don't have to do anything about it. Just notice it. And you can always acknowledge that feeling or that thought and then finish by saying something like, this is the feeling I feel. It's okay to feel that feeling. So when you've noticed and labeled, you have kind of what you're working with. Take another deep breath in. And out. One more deep breath in. And out. So what you did initially when you labeled what you feel was practice mindfulness. You were paying attention internally. What did you feel? Where did you feel it? I want you to continue to do that as we move into this next part of the practice. I want you to normalize the fact that you are human. So when you feel whatever it was, anger, disappointment, sadness, stress, anxiety, joy, whatever it was, I want you to say to yourself, this is what people experience when they experience whatever the feeling was. I'm not alone in feeling this. And as you say these things, either internally to yourself or out loud, notice any changes that you feel. If it was a feeling of stressed and anxious and hurt, maybe say something like, this is how it feels when someone hurts, when someone suffers. And then finally, introduce a little bit of kindness into this dialogue. So again, either to yourself or out loud, I want you to say something nice to help ground yourself from that feeling of what you were just going through. Maybe this is, may I accept myself as I am? May I be strong? May I be kind to myself? May I give myself what I need right now? Maybe may I forgive myself? And you can make those words your own. It's going to feel more authentic when it's your voice that speaks. But I know for myself, it was helpful to have some ideas of things I could say to start that. So in doing all of those steps, we've just gone through the entire process of self-compassion. We've paid attention to what we feel and we validated it. We've connected it to what it's like to be human, so we know we aren't alone. And then we've started to shift to kindness, kind words, kind statements, in order to shift away from self-blame and self-criticism. So you can end this practice with one more deep breath in. And out. And again, just notice what you feel, where you feel it. Maybe it's still there. That's okay. Maybe you feel a little lighter. That's okay too. So thank you for participating in that. I hope it was helpful. And it does take a little bit of tweaks here and there. You want to make that practice your own. So I will say, sometimes this is really difficult for people at first. This idea of being nice and kind and understanding to yourself doesn't come naturally because you've had all of these years of maybe feeling critical or trying so hard to make yourself do better. So if this is the case and you were like, I have no idea what you mean by saying nice, kind things to myself, all the things that were there, I couldn't say to myself, it's cringy, I'm not going to do it. I want you to imagine that a friend or family member, someone that you care very deeply, was going through the exact same thing that you're going through, and they were telling you about it. What is it that you would say? What would you be for them in that situation? Because, I mean, according to the polls I had at the beginning, a lot of you really struggle with being what you can be to other people, to yourselves. So maybe it's helping to see, what do I do for other people that I can start to do for myself more often? And then maybe there's little strategies that you can start practicing to help make that a little bit easier. We'll have some ideas at the end of this. If you find that those feelings were overwhelming, remember to continue breathing through them. I think sometimes when we feel so overwhelmed, we get lost in we don't want this feeling to last. We don't want to sit with it, that we forget to breathe through it. And breathing through it really helps us to build our tolerance of what we feel so that we can be with more challenging feelings for longer. And it really helps us to be okay with accepting and validating those feelings. We don't have to live in them, but the moment that we accept and validate, a lot of the times they start to alleviate. It's the times when we say that we shouldn't be feeling a certain way, or we resist feeling what we're feeling, that it continues to persist in our life. So we have to, in some ways, acknowledge and validate it for ourselves. I always liked this idea that feelings and thoughts are all just passing clouds. They arise, sometimes they rain on us, and then they move on their way. So allow that stuff to just sink in so that you can acknowledge that even when you're going through it and it is tough and it sucks and it's hard, it's temporary. And then be patient with yourselves. This is maybe the first time that you're trying to practice self-compassion. I wouldn't expect you to be great at it right away, right? Like you're not going into professional athlete level of self-compassion immediately. Just be the beginner who's learning and trying and growing. Because if anything, that's what self-compassion is literally all about. So be patient, give yourself the time and space to practice this. I have some ideas for you if you're unsure. But I figured I would share this as well. So Dr. Neff and Dr. Jeremiah, they created a self-compassion assessment tool. So you can see really like how self-compassionate you already are for yourselves. I'm going to put that link in the chat here so that you can access it. And I put it up there as well. So if you want to take a screenshot and come back to it later, you can do that as well. I thought it was helpful for just checking in with how self-compassionate and empathetic you are for yourself, just to have a number, a starting point. It might be a good way to start practicing what we've just talked about and then check in later on to see if anything's changed, because maybe things move a little bit on the scales. Some of you might be really numbers or data driven. It's a good way to have that evidence for yourself to say like, yeah, I'm doing a little bit better. I feel a little bit more at ease. I'm able to understand and be with myself in hard situations. Yeah. So I'll put that there. And then I will end this program with a bunch of ideas, and then we'll have some Q&A time at the end here. So if you are struggling to get started with this, right? Like maybe the meditation, guided imagery stuff, that's not working for you. Maybe starting a self-compassion journal. So one of the activities that they actually recommend in the workbook was creating a space that you write about the times that you've judged yourself or you've been really hard on yourself. And then you try and reframe using the elements that we talked about, mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness, to just get a different perspective of things, right? To just change it a little bit. This will help us to find new opportunities to be self-compassionate to ourselves. I like to think of this as like rehearsal, right? If we can think of times that we missed opportunities to do this, right? We couldn't be self-compassionate or empathetic to ourselves in the moment. We were overcome by what we were feeling. If we can go back to it at a later time when we are grounded and able to really see it truthfully and honestly without being overwhelmed, that helps us rehearse, practice, and then enter into the next situation more prepared. And I think you'll start to notice it gets a little bit easier as you do that. So missed opportunities are not failures. They give us a lot of material to work with. So it's okay to make mistakes. We'll all learn and grow from them. Another suggestion might be right before bed, making a list of things and people that you're grateful for. I started doing this because I found it to be really helpful, like a reminder that I'm not alone and that a lot of people help me throughout my day and my life. It's good to make space for them, to just acknowledge what other people do for you, or what even like your simple things, right? Like, I don't know, this water bottle. I'm appreciative that it's here and continuously shows up for me every day. I can fill it up with water and it's there. Those little things can be really important because there's a lot of things that we can be grateful for in our lives that we oftentimes take for granted in the hustle and bustle of things. So it doesn't have to be a physical list. A lot of the time I try and end my day actually like in bed, trying to fall asleep, just saying like, I'm really thankful for blah, blah, blah. I'm really thankful for blah, blah, blah. I think that helps us to feel way more connected to what we can appreciate. And that helps us appreciate ourselves a little bit more as well. You can make a physical list too if you want to track it. It can go in your self-compassion journal. And then the last one is a loving kindness practice. So I've heard about this a lot from spiritual teachers, meditation teachers out in the world, but a loving kindness practice is really just being able to connect with that feeling of love and kindness that we offer to other people, feel for other people, and we can give to ourselves. So the one that they have given in the book itself, they just provided like a template. It's very basic. May I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, and may I live with ease. Straight to the point. It covers a lot of things where it's just well-wishing for ourselves. So just starting to reframe our brain from saying, look for the things that aren't good enough, that you have to do better, that you feel bad about. We're just going to change directions and look for the things that we're wishing for ourselves and hoping for ourselves. And a lot of the time we're making this stuff happen because we are redirecting what we give our attention to. So make those statements entirely your own. It could be any number of things, and it doesn't have to be just about you, right? Maybe there's someone in your life that you're worried about. So maybe someone's sick and you say, well, may so-and-so be healthy. May so-and-so be safe. You're making time to connect with other people in that way. And even if it isn't changing the world, it isn't making anything different, it's going to change how you feel, and it's going to change how you treat the people around you. And I love that. I mean, I think there's so much more that we can offer when we're feeling good internally. So maybe for yourself, maybe for other people, and make it entirely your own. You don't have to stick with this. I found that one covers a lot, but maybe there's unique changes you want to make to it as you go. And then if you want, you can take a picture of this. This is the resources that I use to build this program. The Mindful Self-Compassion workbook is wonderful. It's a workbook you fill out as you go. There's writing prompts, all kinds of things that I found really helpful. And Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. If you are a creative person, that is the book for you. She will make you feel good about creating and letting go of like the self-critique. And then finally, Kristen Neff and Chris Drimmer also put a website together called selfcompassion.org. So many resources there to check out. All right. And then counseling services information is up here. Just know that we are offering services to all students. So if you are interested in pursuing counseling services, either as an individual or if you want to join one of our groups that are coming up or that are running currently, you can access all of that stuff by either calling our office or checking out our website. I highly recommend following us on Instagram, mindful_Oz. And then we also have peer educators. You can follow them on Instagram at Oz Peer to Peer. And you'll see a lot of our updates come out that way right now, just because social media is a little bit more accessible to students. So we've been trying to push out stuff like this on social media. So if you have it, I would say follow it to get some more info. And that is all I got. Does anybody have any questions or anything that I can answer before you go? I do have one more poll just to get an idea of how helpful this was. But I'm here to answer any questions, either about the Counseling Center or about anything that I covered today. You can put them in the chat or you can ask. You can unmute yourselves, I think. So, yes, and I will stop recording.